When 12-year-old Emily Foster discovers a mysterious photo of herself as a baby in a wealthy CEO's wallet, her world is turned upside down. The man, Julian Adler, claims to be her father, a man she's never met, who abandoned her years ago. Torn between anger and hope, Emily demands the truth. Why did he leave her, and why is he back now? As secrets unravel and emotions collide, Emily must decide if she can forgive the man who once broke her heart, or risk losing the only chance at family she's ever known. The winter winds whipped through the streets of Havenbrook, carrying with them the scent of snow and pine. Inside the warm confines of Starlight Haven Orphanage, Emily Foster sat cross-legged on the wooden floor of the storage room. 12 years old and endlessly curious, she was sorting through a pile of donated items that had arrived earlier that morning. Boxes filled with old clothes, books, and miscellaneous trinkets surrounded her. Most of it was unremarkable: faded jackets, dog-eared novels, and mismatched toys, but Emily always held out hope for something special. She loved uncovering treasures hidden in the mundane. Her hands brushed against something smooth and cool in one of the boxes. Frowning, she reached in and pulled out a sleek black leather wallet. It felt heavy in her hands, the leather still soft and unscuffed. It was clearly out of place among the jumble of well-worn donations. Intrigued, Emily flipped it open. Inside, there were no cards or cash, only a single photograph. She carefully slid it out and turned it over, her heart skipping a beat as she studied the image. The photograph was slightly faded, but the figures in it were clear. A man and a woman stood close together, holding a baby wrapped in a soft blanket. The baby's chubby cheeks and dark brown hair caught her attention immediately. Emily's breath caught. The baby in the photograph looked just like her. The same rounded cheeks, the same curious eyes, even the tiny birthmark on the left side of her chin. She turned the photo over and noticed something scrawled in neat handwriting on the back. "Our little star, Evelyn. Love, J. Evelyn." The name didn't mean anything to Emily, but the baby's resemblance to her was undeniable. Her mind raced. Who were these people? And why did this photograph end up here, in the bottom of a donation box? "Emily." A voice called from the hallway, startling her. She quickly stuffed the wallet into her jacket pocket and stood, brushing dust off her jeans. "In here," she replied, stepping out of the storage room with a forced nonchalance. It was Mrs. Caldwell, the orphanage director, her arms full of freshly laundered blankets. "There you are," Mrs. Caldwell said with a smile. "Thank you for helping out, but you should join the others soon. We're setting up the Christmas tree in the main hall." Emily nodded absently, her mind still on the photograph tucked safely away in her pocket. "I'll be there in a minute," she promised. Mrs. Caldwell gave her an encouraging smile before walking away. Once Emily was alone again, she slipped back into the storage room and pulled the photograph out. The longer she stared at it, the more questions swirled in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that this photo was connected to her somehow. It was as if a tiny thread was pulling at the edges of her life, unraveling a mystery she hadn't even known existed. Later that evening, Emily sat in her bunk bed, the photograph tucked under her pillow. The other children were fast asleep, their soft snores filling the quiet dormitory. But Emily couldn't rest. She kept replaying the details in her head: the man's strong features, the woman's gentle smile, the way they held the baby as if she were their whole world. Her fingers traced the writing on the back of the photo. Evelyn. Was that the baby's name? Was it her name? And who was Jay? Emily had always known she was left at Starlight Haven as an infant, with no record of her family or where she came from. Mrs. Caldwell had told her as much when she was younger, and Emily had made peace with the idea that she might never know her parents. But now, this photograph seemed to suggest otherwise. She thought about showing it to Mrs. Caldwell. Maybe the kind, matronly woman would recognize the people in the picture. But something stopped her. This felt personal, like a secret meant for her alone. Instead, she made a decision. Clutching the photograph tightly, Emily whispered to herself, "I'm going to find out who you are. And why you left me." Outside, the wind howled, carrying snow across the darkened streets of Havenbrook. Inside, Emily lay awake, her mind racing with questions, and the faintest flicker of hope. She didn't know it yet, but that single photograph would change her life forever. The next morning, Emily Foster sat at the long wooden table in the orphanage's cozy dining hall, barely touching her breakfast. The other children chattered around her, their voices blending with the clinking of utensils on plates, but Emily's thoughts were elsewhere. The photograph she'd found was folded carefully in her pocket, and it seemed to weigh more heavily than it should. Across the room, Mrs. Caldwell was bustling about, directing the morning cleanup routine. Emily hesitated, biting her lip as she considered her next move. Finally, she stood and walked over to the director, her steps deliberate but hesitant. "Mrs. Caldwell?" Emily asked softly, her voice just loud enough to rise above the noise. Mrs. Caldwell turned, her kind eyes landing on the girl. "Yes, dear. Is something on your mind?" Emily glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then pulled the photograph from her pocket. She held it out to Mrs. Caldwell, who took it with a curious expression. "I found this yesterday," Emily said. "In the donation box. Do you know who these people are?" Mrs. Caldwell's cheerful demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly. Her brow furrowed as she studied the photograph, and a flicker of recognition passed through her eyes. She turned it over, reading the inscription on the back. "Where exactly did you find this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "In one of the boxes," Emily replied. "It was in a wallet. I think the baby might be me." Mrs. Caldwell froze, her expression carefully neutral. She studied the photo again before looking at Emily. "It does look like you," she admitted. "The resemblance is remarkable." Emily leaned forward, her curiosity bubbling over. "Do you know who they are?" Mrs. Caldwell hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Finally, she let out a small sigh. "The man in this photograph is Julian Adler," she said. "Julian Adler?" Emily repeated, frowning. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "He's one of the wealthiest men in Havenbrook. A successful businessman and a very private person. He's also the one who donated the money that helped build this orphanage." Emily's heart raced. Why would a man like Julian Adler have a photograph of her, or someone who looked just like her? And why would it end up in a donation box? "Do you think he's my dad?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mrs. Caldwell hesitated again. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But if you want answers, I think you'll need to speak with him directly." Emily stared at her, a mix of excitement and fear swirling in her chest. "How do I find him?" Mrs. Caldwell walked over to her desk and opened a drawer, pulling out a small, embossed business card. She handed it to Emily. "This is the address of Adler Industries. It's his company headquarters. If you're determined to meet him, that's where you'll find him." Emily took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. The logo was elegant, the name, Julian Adler, printed in bold letters below it. She read the address, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Thank you," she said, clutching the card tightly. Mrs. Caldwell placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression softening. "Be careful, Emily," she said. "Julian Adler isn't an easy man to reach, and this might not give you all the answers you're looking for." Emily nodded, though her resolve was already set. That afternoon, as the other children played in the snow outside, Emily stayed in her room, staring at the business card. She knew what she had to do. The next day, she would go to Adler Industries and find out the truth about Julian Adler, and, maybe, about herself. The next morning, Emily Foster stood in front of the towering glass building of Adler Industries. The sleek, modern skyscraper loomed over the bustling streets of Havenbrook, its mirrored windows reflecting the pale winter sky. Emily clutched the business card tightly in one hand and the photograph in the other, her breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. The idea of meeting Julian Adler, the man she hoped would have answers, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her heart pounded as she stepped through the revolving doors and into the grand lobby. The space was as intimidating as the building itself, marble floors gleamed underfoot, and the air buzzed with the quiet efficiency of employees moving briskly to their destinations. Emily approached the sleek reception desk, where a sharply dressed woman was typing on a keyboard. The receptionist glanced up, her professional smile unwavering. "Good morning. How can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Mr. Julian Adler," Emily said, trying to sound confident. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" Emily shook her head. "No, but I really need to talk to him. It's important." The receptionist's polite demeanor hardened into something more distant. "I'm afraid Mr. Adler doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you'd like, I can pass along a message." "No." Emily interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "I need to talk to him in person. Please. It's about this." She placed the photograph on the desk, hoping it would spark recognition. The receptionist's eyes flicked to the image, but her expression remained neutral. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Adler is extremely busy," the woman said firmly. Emily's shoulders sagged, but she refused to give up. "Then I'll wait," she said, stepping back from the desk and crossing her arms. The receptionist frowned. "Miss, you can't just." But Emily was already heading to one of the plush benches along the lobby's edge. She sat down, gripping the photograph in her lap, and stared resolutely at the elevator bank. She would wait all day if she had to. Hours passed. Emily ignored the curious glances from employees and the occasional annoyed look from the receptionist. Just when she was beginning to doubt her plan, the elevator doors opened, and a tall, sharply dressed man stepped out. Julian Adler's presence commanded attention. His tailored gray suit and confident stride made it clear he was the man in charge. His dark hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and his piercing blue eyes scanned the room with practiced indifference. Emily's breath caught as she recognized him from the photograph. She stood abruptly, clutching the picture. "Mr. Adler," she called, her voice echoing in the large space. Julian turned, his eyes landing on her with mild curiosity. His expression quickly shifted to one of surprise when he saw the photograph in her hands. He froze, his gaze locked on the image as if it were something from a dream, or a nightmare. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice low and measured. Emily stepped forward, her courage bolstered by his reaction. "I found it," she said. "In a donation box at my orphanage." Julian's jaw tightened, and he glanced around, clearly aware of the attention they were drawing. "Come with me," he said curtly, striding toward a side door. Emily hesitated but followed him, clutching the photograph tightly. He led her to a small, private meeting room, where he closed the door behind them. The tension in the air was palpable. "Now," Julian said, turning to face her. "Who are you, and why do you have this?" Emily straightened her shoulders, meeting his intense gaze. "My name is Emily Foster," she said. "I live at Starlight Haven Orphanage. And I think this baby is me." Julian's expression hardened, and he looked away for a moment, running a hand through his hair. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "You're right," he said. "That baby is you." Emily's heart raced. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a wave of emotions crashing over her. "Then who are you?" she demanded. "And why do you have this picture?" Julian hesitated, his normally composed demeanor faltering. "I'm your father," he admitted quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Emily stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he'd said. "You're my dad." Yes, Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I owe you an explanation. He gestured for her to sit, and after a moment of hesitation, she did. He sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly on the table. Your mother's name was Evelyn, he began. She was everything to me. We were happy, until. He paused, his voice catching. Until she died. It was a car accident. I was devastated, Emily. I didn't know how to be a father without her. I thought you deserved better than I could give you. So, I made the hardest decision of my life, I placed you in the care of Starlight Haven. Emily's hands clenched into fists. You just gave me away. Julian winced at the accusation but nodded. I thought I was doing what was best for you. I thought someone else could give you the life you deserved. But I was wrong, Emily. I've regretted it every single day since. Emily's chest tightened with a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. Why now? She asked. Why are you telling me this now? Because fate brought us together, Julian said simply. And because I'm done running from my mistakes. I want to make things right, if you'll let me. Emily stared at him, her emotions swirling. She didn't know what to believe or how to feel. All she knew was that this man, her father, had just turned her world upside down. The meeting room was silent except for the faint hum of the building's air conditioning. Emily sat frozen in her chair, staring at the man across from her, her father. The weight of his words hung in the air, each syllable echoing in her mind. I want to make things right, if you'll let me, Julian had said. But how could she? How could she trust someone who had abandoned her before she even had a chance to know him? You thought you were doing what was best for me. Emily's voice cracked as she spoke. Her hazel eyes brimmed with unshed tears, though she refused to let them fall. By giving me away. Julian flinched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I thought I was too broken to raise you, he admitted, his voice raw. Your mother. Evelyn was everything to me. When I lost her, I didn't just lose my wife. I lost myself. Emily's fingers tightened around the photograph in her lap. So, you gave up, she said bitterly. You gave me up because it was easier for you. No, Julian said firmly, leaning forward. It wasn't easy. It was the hardest decision I've ever made. I thought you deserved more than a father who couldn't get out of bed most days, who couldn't look at you without seeing what he'd lost. Emily's lip trembled, but her voice rose. You didn't even try. You didn't give me a chance to know you or to have a family. You just left me. Julian closed his eyes, as if her words physically hurt him. I know, he said quietly. And I'll never forgive myself for that. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily's mind raced, her emotions a storm of anger, hurt, and confusion. The man before her wasn't the cold, distant figure she had imagined. He was vulnerable, raw, and full of regret. But that didn't make the pain any less real. Why now? Emily finally asked, her voice quieter but no less sharp. Why are you here now, after all these years? Julian opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Because I couldn't stay away anymore, he said. When I saw that photograph again, it was like the universe was giving me another chance. I knew I had to take it, no matter how much you hated me for it. Emily looked down at the photograph, her vision blurring as tears finally spilled over. The smiling faces of her parents stared back at her, a snapshot of a life she never got to have. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Julian nodded slowly, his expression heavy with sorrow. I understand, he said. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, maybe not ever. But I'm here now, Emily. And I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. Emily shook her head, standing abruptly. She couldn't sit there any longer, couldn't handle the overwhelming emotions swirling inside her. I need to go, she said, clutching the photograph tightly. Julian stood as well, his movements slow and deliberate. "Emily, please," he said softly. "I'm not going anywhere this time. Take all the time you need, but know that I'll be here if you decide to let me in." Emily didn't respond. She turned and walked out of the room, her steps quick and determined. As she exited the building and stepped into the cold winter air, she felt the photograph pressing against her palm like a burning question she couldn't escape. That evening, back at the orphanage, Emily sat on her bed, the photograph spread out in front of her. The other children were asleep, the dormitory quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. She traced her fingers over the faces in the picture, her thoughts swirling. Part of her wanted to tear the photograph in half, to rid herself of the reminder of a man who had failed her so completely. But another part, a quieter, more fragile part, clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the business card Mrs. Caldwell had given her days before. Julian Adler. The name felt heavy now, filled with meaning she hadn't been prepared for. "Why did you leave me?" she whispered to the photograph, as if it could answer. The only sound was the distant hum of the heating system, but in her heart, Emily knew the real question wasn't why he had left. It was whether she could find the strength to let him back in. As the snow fell softly outside, Emily lay awake, the photograph clutched to her chest. Her emotions were a jumble of anger, sadness, and something else she couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps. She didn't know yet. What she did know was that this was far from over. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions for Emily. She avoided telling anyone at the orphanage about her meeting with Julian Adler, keeping the photograph and the truth tucked away like a fragile secret. Mrs. Caldwell watched her with a concerned gaze but didn't press her, sensing the weight of whatever burden Emily was carrying. Julian, true to his word, didn't disappear. On the third day after their meeting, he arrived at Starlight Haven, much to Emily's surprise. She was in the courtyard, helping younger children build a snowman, when she saw him step through the iron gates. He carried a box wrapped in gold paper, his expression cautious but warm. Emily stiffened. She wasn't ready to talk to him, but the other children had already noticed. Their excitement rippled through the group. "Who's that?" Laurel, Emily's closest friend, asked, nudging her with an elbow. Emily hesitated. "Just, someone who wants to help," she mumbled, hoping it would end the conversation. But her heart raced as Julian approached. "Emily," he said softly when he reached her. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a hint of uncertainty. "I brought something for you, and the other kids, too." She crossed her arms, her breath visible in the frosty air. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Julian glanced at the group of children watching curiously, then back at her. "Because I meant what I said. I want to be part of your life. But I also know I can't force that, so I thought I'd start by helping out here." Emily's brow furrowed, but before she could respond, Laurel piped up. "What's in the box?" Julian smiled faintly and set the box on the snow-covered bench. "Christmas gifts. For everyone." The children cheered, rushing forward to see what was inside. Emily watched from a distance as Julian knelt, carefully unpacking the box. It was filled with small, thoughtful presents, books, art supplies, puzzles, and even a few plush toys. The kids' laughter and excitement filled the courtyard, but Emily stayed rooted in place. When the commotion settled, Julian stood and approached her again. "I didn't just come here for them," he said quietly. "I came for you." Emily's jaw tightened. "You think a few gifts will make up for everything?" she asked, her voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. "No," Julian said firmly. "I don't think anything I do will erase the mistakes I've made. But I'm not here to erase the past, Emily. I'm here to build something better. If you'll let me." Emily looked away, her emotions swirling. She wanted to yell at him, to tell him to leave, but there was a small part of her, a stubborn, hopeful part, that wanted to see if he was telling the truth. Inside the warm confines of the orphanage, the children played with their new gifts while Emily sat in the corner of the common room, staring out the frosted window. Julian was speaking with Mrs. Caldwell across the room, his posture polite but slightly tense. Emily couldn't hear their conversation, but Mrs. Caldwell occasionally glanced her way, her expression thoughtful. Eventually, Julian walked over to her, his footsteps soft against the wooden floor. He crouched beside her chair, his face level with hers. "Emily," he began, his voice gentle. "I know this is a lot to take in. And I know I can't fix things overnight. But I want to try." She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the snow falling outside. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Why did you wait so long?" Julian's shoulders sagged, but he didn't look away. "Because I was scared," he admitted. "Scared that I wouldn't be enough. Scared that you wouldn't want me in your life. But seeing you now, I can't stay away anymore." Emily turned to him, her hazel eyes sharp. "How do I know you won't leave again?" she asked, her voice trembling. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. "You don't," he said honestly. "But I'll prove it to you, every single day. Starting with this." He handed her the journal, and Emily took it reluctantly. She flipped it open, her eyes widening slightly as she scanned the pages. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, each dated over the years since she had been placed in the orphanage. "I wrote to you," Julian explained softly. "Every year, on your birthday, on Christmas. I never sent them because I was too much of a coward, but I kept them. They're yours now." Emily's fingers traced the ink on the pages. The letters were filled with words of regret, love, and hope. They were raw and vulnerable, and for the first time, Emily saw a glimpse of the man her mother must have loved. She closed the journal and looked up at him. "This doesn't make everything okay," she said quietly. "I know," Julian replied. "But it's a start." Emily studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay," she said. "I'll give you a chance. But just one." Julian's face softened with relief, and he nodded. "That's all I ask." As the children prepared for bed, Emily sat in her room, the journal open on her lap. She read through Julian's words, her emotions a mix of anger and understanding. He had failed her, yes, but he was trying now. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope that they could find a way forward, together. The days following Emily's hesitant decision to give Julian a chance were a slow, cautious dance. True to his word, Julian returned to the orphanage every afternoon. His visits were a mixture of quiet moments with Emily and engaging with the other children, who had quickly taken a liking to him. While the other kids were eager for his attention, Emily kept her guard up, watching him from a distance, trying to discern if his actions were genuine. One snowy afternoon, Julian arrived at the orphanage carrying a long, rectangular box wrapped in festive paper. The children crowded around him as he walked into the common room, their curiosity piqued. "What is it, Mr. Adler?" Laurel asked, tugging on his coat. Julian smiled, his expression warm but focused on Emily, who stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. "It's something special," he said. "But I need Emily's help to make it complete." Emily blinked in surprise, her gaze flicking to the box. "Why me?" "Because it's for you," Julian said softly, setting the box on a nearby table. "But it's something we need to do together." The children groaned with playful disappointment as Julian gently shooed them away, promising they'd all get to see later. Emily hesitated, her natural curiosity warring with her skepticism. Finally, she stepped forward. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "Open it and see," Julian said, stepping aside. Emily pulled at the ribbon, her movements slow and deliberate. When she lifted the lid, her breath caught. Inside was a small evergreen tree, its roots wrapped in burlap, along with a set of ornaments, ribbons, and lights. "A tree?" she asked, glancing up at him. "A special tree," Julian explained. "Your mother loved the holidays. She always wanted us to have a tree we could decorate together. I thought maybe we could do that now. For her." Emily's fingers brushed over the soft branches, her heart squeezing at his words. She didn't know much about her mother, but the idea of honoring her memory like this tugged at something deep inside her. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's do it." Julian carried the tree outside to the orphanage's courtyard, where the snow had transformed the space into a winter wonderland. The other children watched from the windows, their faces pressed to the glass as Emily and Julian worked. They chose a spot near a stone bench and planted the tree carefully, their breath visible in the chilly air. Julian handed Emily the first ornament, a delicate glass star. She held it gingerly, the light catching the facets and creating tiny rainbows. "This was your mom's favorite ornament," Julian said. "She always put it at the top of the tree." Emily's fingers tightened around the star. "Can I put it there?" "Of course," Julian said, lifting her gently so she could reach the highest branch. As she placed the star, a small smile tugged at her lips. For the first time, she felt a connection to the mother she had never known. When Julian set her back down, she turned to him, her expression softening. "What was she like?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian's face lit up with a mixture of joy and sadness. "She was incredible," he said. "Smart, kind, and strong. She had a laugh that could make you forget every bad thing in the world. And she loved you more than anything." Emily looked down at the tree, her hands brushing against the branches. "I wish I could have known her." Julian crouched beside her, his gaze level with hers. "I see her in you every day," he said. "In the way you carry yourself, in how brave and determined you are. She'd be so proud of you, Emily." "I know I am." As the tree took shape, decorated with ornaments and ribbons, Emily found herself opening up in small ways. She asked Julian questions about her mother, her voice tentative at first but growing steadier with each answer he gave. Julian shared stories of Evelyn's love for painting, her habit of humming while she worked, and the way she used to call Emily her little star. By the time they finished, the tree stood as a symbol of something new. It wasn't just a memorial for Evelyn, it was a testament to the bond Julian and Emily were beginning to forge. "You did a great job," Julian said as they stepped back to admire their work. "It's beautiful." Emily nodded, her gaze lingering on the tree. "It is," she said softly. After a pause, she added, "Thanks, for doing this." Julian's heart swelled at her words. "Thank you for letting me," he said. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, the snow falling gently around them. Emily reached out and took his hand, her fingers curling tentatively around his. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. "Do you think she's watching?" Emily asked, her voice quiet. Julian squeezed her hand lightly. "I think she is," he said. "And I think she's smiling." Emily didn't say anything, but the faint smile on her face was all the response he needed. Back inside the orphanage, Emily sat by the window, staring out at the tree. Its decorations sparkled in the moonlight, a beacon of hope against the dark winter night. For the first time, she felt a sense of peace, not complete, but enough to let her sleep with a lighter heart. In her hands, she held the small journal Julian had given her days earlier, filled with letters he had written but never sent. She opened it to a random page and began to read, her father's words weaving a picture of a man who had made mistakes but was trying to do better. As she read, her guard began to lower just a little more. Maybe, she thought, this was the start of something new. The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with a quiet transformation. Julian continued visiting the orphanage every day, his presence becoming a regular part of the children's lives. While the other kids flocked to him with excitement, Emily still kept a slight distance, observing him as she tried to reconcile the image of this attentive man with the father who had abandoned her years ago. Despite her caution, their bond began to take shape. Julian patiently answered her questions about her mother, often sharing small anecdotes that made Emily feel closer to the woman she had never met. Every evening, as the orphanage settled into its nighttime quiet, Emily would sit by the small tree they had planted and reread the letters Julian had given her. Slowly, the words etched in those pages softened the walls around her heart. One snowy afternoon, Julian arrived with a sparkle in his eye that piqued everyone's curiosity. He carried a large envelope tied with a red ribbon, which he handed directly to Mrs. Caldwell. The children gathered around, buzzing with excitement as Mrs. Caldwell opened the envelope and pulled out a beautifully designed card. "You're inviting all of us?" Mrs. Caldwell asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and delight. Julian smiled warmly. "Yes. I'd like to host a Christmas celebration for the entire orphanage at my home. It's been too long since this place has seen a proper holiday party." The children erupted in cheers, their laughter filling the room. Emily stood at the edge of the group, her hazel eyes narrowing slightly as she studied Julian. She couldn't decide if his gesture was genuine or another attempt to earn her trust. Julian must have noticed her hesitation because he approached her after the excitement had settled. "Emily," he said gently, crouching to meet her eye level. "I'd like you to come, too. But only if you want to." Emily frowned, her arms crossed defensively. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "For the kids, or for me?" Julian's gaze didn't waver. "For both," he admitted. "The other children deserve a special holiday, but I also want to share this with you. Your mother loved Christmas. It was her favorite time of year, and I think she would have wanted us to celebrate together." Emily's heart clenched at his words. She didn't answer right away but gave a small nod before walking away. She couldn't explain why she felt conflicted. Part of her wanted to trust him, but the pain of his absence still lingered like an open wound. On Christmas Eve, the children arrived at Julian's estate in a rented bus, their excitement bubbling over as they stepped into the grand foyer. The house was transformed into a holiday wonderland, with garlands draped along the staircase, twinkling lights casting a warm glow, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filling the air. A massive Christmas tree stood in the center of the living room, its branches heavy with sparkling ornaments. Emily stepped cautiously into the house, her gaze sweeping over the luxurious surroundings. She had never seen anything like it. Julian greeted each child warmly, but when he saw Emily, his expression softened. "Welcome," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'm glad you came." Emily shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, but her eyes betrayed her curiosity. She followed the other children into the living room, where gifts wrapped in shiny paper waited under the tree. Throughout the evening, Julian stayed close to Emily, gently guiding her through the festivities. He helped her hang a few ornaments on the tree, served her a plate of holiday treats, and even sat beside her during a caroling session. Slowly, her defenses began to lower, though she still kept her guard up. As the party wound down and the younger children began to tire, Julian approached Emily with a small, velvet box. "I have something for you," he said softly, holding it out to her. Emily hesitated, her fingers brushing against the box before she took it. She opened it carefully, her breath catching when she saw what was inside. It was a delicate gold locket, its surface engraved with a small starburst pattern. She opened the locket, revealing two tiny photographs inside. On one side was a picture of her mother, Evelyn, smiling brightly. On the other was a recent photo of Emily and Julian, taken during one of their quiet moments by the tree they had decorated together. Emily's fingers trembled as she touched the locket. "This was hers," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother wore it every day. She would have wanted you to have it." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Julian knelt beside her, his gaze steady. "Emily, I know I can't change the past, and I know I've hurt you. But I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I'll always be here, for you. Emily looked at him, her hazel eyes shimmering with unshed tears. For the first time, she let herself believe that he meant it. I still don't know if I can forgive you, she said quietly. I'll wait, Julian replied. As long as it takes. She nodded, her fingers gripping the locket tightly. Okay. As the night came to an end, Emily found herself standing by the large Christmas tree, watching the lights twinkle against the glass ornaments. Julian joined her, his presence quiet and unobtrusive. Do you think she'd be proud of us? Emily asked suddenly, her voice soft. Julian's throat tightened, but he managed a small smile. I think she'd be very proud, he said. Of both of us. Emily leaned slightly closer to him, her shoulders brushing against his arm. For the first time in years, she felt the warmth of something she hadn't realized she was missing, family. Together, they stood by the tree, watching the snow fall outside, their bond fragile but growing stronger with each passing moment. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, the world outside Julian Adler's estate blanketed in fresh snow. The faint sound of laughter and holiday music echoed through the halls as the children from Starlight Haven Orphanage awoke to the sight of stockings hung on the grand fireplace and a fresh layer of gifts under the towering Christmas tree. Emily Foster sat at the edge of one of the oversized armchairs in the living room, Mocha the teddy bear tucked firmly under her arm. The locket Julian had given her the night before rested against her chest, its weight both comforting and unfamiliar. She watched the other children eagerly tear into their gifts, their squeals of delight filling the air, but her focus kept drifting toward Julian, who stood near the tree, handing out presents with a genuine smile. Despite her lingering doubts, something about the sight of him felt different. He wasn't the cold, distant figure she had imagined when she first learned his name. Here he was, engaged, kind, and, most importantly, present. It was a feeling Emily wasn't sure she had words for yet. After the initial flurry of gift opening, the children scattered, some playing with their new toys while others bundled up to explore the snowy grounds outside. Emily remained by the tree, her gaze wandering over its glittering ornaments. Julian approached quietly, holding 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. Mind if I join you? He asked, offering her one of the mugs. Emily shrugged but took the hot chocolate, cradling it in her hands. The warmth seeped through her fingers, grounding her. Julian sat down in the chair beside hers, his movements careful and unhurried. Did you sleep well? He asked after a moment. Emily nodded, her eyes still on the tree. It's nice here, she admitted softly. The house, I mean. It feels safe. Julian's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to say more, but he let the silence linger, allowing her to speak if she wanted to. After a pause, Emily looked down at the locket around her neck. Why did you keep it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. All these years? Julian's gaze dropped to the locket, his expression softening. Because it reminded me of her, he said. And of you. Even when I couldn't bring myself to see you, I kept it close. It was my way of holding on to the hope that one day I'd find the courage to make things right. Emily's fingers traced the delicate engraving on the locket. It's hard to forgive you, she said bluntly. For leaving me. I know, Julian said, his voice steady. And I'll carry that regret for the rest of my life. But I hope, with time, I can show you that I'm not going anywhere again. Emily looked at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. For the first time, she saw not just a stranger but a man who was trying for her, trying for them both. Wait here, Julian said suddenly, setting his mug down and standing. Emily frowned, watching him disappear down the hall. A few moments later, he returned, holding a folded envelope in his hand. He extended it toward her, his expression unreadable. What's this? Emily asked, taking the envelope cautiously. It's from your mom, Julian said softly. She wrote it before she passed. I've kept it all these years, but I think it's time you have it. Emily's heart thudded in her chest as she carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat but slanted, each word flowing into the next. Her eyes scanned the page, tears pooling as she read. My dearest Emily. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I hope you know how much I love you, how much joy you brought into my life. You are my little star, my brightest light in the darkest times. I know your father and I have made mistakes, and for that, I am sorry. But I believe in him, and I believe in you. You are strong, and you are loved. Never forget that. With all my heart. Mom. Emily's hands trembled as she finished reading, the letter clutched tightly to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, and for the first time, she let them fall freely. She loved you more than anything, Julian said quietly. And she wanted you to know that. Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. Why didn't you give this to me sooner? Julian's shoulders slumped. Because I was scared, he admitted. Scared that I didn't deserve to be part of your life. But I'm done running, Emily. I want to be here for you, for as long as you'll let me. As the day went on, Emily felt the weight on her heart begin to lift. She still had questions, and she still had doubts, but the letter from her mother gave her something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that maybe she could let Julian in, even just a little. That evening, as the children played outside in the snow, Julian and Emily stood by the small tree they had planted weeks earlier. The ornaments they had placed on it sparkled in the soft glow of the outdoor lights, a quiet reminder of the bond they were building. Do you think she's watching? Emily asked, her voice soft. Julian smiled, his gaze fixed on the tree. I think she is, he said. And I think she's proud of you. Emily looked up at him, her hazel eyes filled with something Julian hadn't seen before, trust. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm but tentative. I think she'd be proud of you too, Emily said quietly. Julian's heart swelled at her words, and he squeezed her hand gently. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that this wasn't the end of their story but the beginning of something new. As the snow continued to fall around them, father and daughter stood side by side, their shared journey just beginning. Together, they were finally finding their way home. This story is a poignant exploration of love, loss, and the power of second chances. At its core, it's about two people, one seeking redemption and the other longing for answers, learning to bridge the gap created by years of pain and separation. Emily's journey reflects the resilience of the human spirit, showing how even the most wounded hearts can open again when met with genuine effort and vulnerability. Julian's transformation from a man consumed by guilt to a father determined to rebuild what he lost demonstrates that it's never too late to make amends, even if the road is fraught with challenges. The ending is a testament to hope and healing. While forgiveness doesn't come easily, the bond between Emily and Julian reminds us that love is a journey, not a destination. It's a story that leaves us with a powerful message: though we cannot rewrite the past, we can create a brighter future by facing our mistakes and choosing to fight for the people who matter most.